And boy, am I glad to be here today for this very special edition of the John Adams Radio Show. This is the week before Christmas, although I think technically, when is Christmas? Is it next? So it is a week from today. All right, we will not have a live broadcast, but we will have a best of. So if you are between, let's say you open gifts at 9 or exchange gifts or whatever you do, and then you go watch a parade, and at 11 o'clock, you find out you're at least 2 hours away from Christmas dinner, which is never before 1. Has anybody ever had Christmas dinner before 1 o'clock? Margie usually clocks in around 5 or 5:30 for lunch. Oh, she's mad now. Well, open your microphone and defend yourself. She's not going to. All right, well, I'm going to change my camera angle here. Let's see, how about this? Let's try there.
John,
How's
if you
that?
would like,
What?
if you would like to cook Christmas dinner, we can have it whenever you're ready.
I would just call Boston Market and go pick the whole thing up.
No, you would not.
Okay, thank you, dear. We have a jam-packed show today with a number of very special guests. And I just want to get right to it, but do not touch the dial today. Is it still okay in this digital age to say, do not touch that dial? I think it is. I don't know if it is or not. In any case, I'm trying to turn some lights on. There we go. That's a little better. We're filling in some shadows there. Well, I wish each of you a very, very Merry Christmas and a prosperous and happy New Year. You know, we go through this life, we have trials and tribulations. We wouldn't know what the heights were if we didn't ever have to be in the valley. But all in all, isn't it a wonderful world? And I put that, I'm not a Facebooker, but I did happen to be on Facebook, and I saw a post that somebody had put up that said, what a wonderful world we live in. And it is. It's not perfect. And the day will come when we all get together in that perfect place. I believe, I hope. It's the hope of Christianity, but nonetheless, certainly I wish you guys a very Merry Christmas. Hanukkah is over. We had a very early Hanukkah this year, but having many Jewish friends, I find that the Jewish faith is able to produce holidays almost at will. So when Ian joins us, I'll ask him what the current holiday is in the Jewish tradition. So what can I say? And we've got great guests today. We've got great topics today. So let's get right to it. But I'm really glad to have you along today. All right, I'm going to share screen here, pow, and go right back here. Pow. Pow. Good. This is working. Is this working? Yes. Yes, this is working correctly. And so now we're going to click on this. Special thank you to our sponsors today. Here's your quote of the week from John Fitzgerald Kennedy. By the way, I want to share with you guys that Margie and I had always wanted to go to the biggest state fair in the United States. And it turns out it's in Texas. I guess that's no surprise. They're almost the biggest of everything. Although I think Alaska is bigger, but there are no people in Alaska. Anyway, We went to Dallas for the Texas State Fair one year, and we stayed about a week and a half. I actually taught out there for the Texas Real Estate Commission, a course, and went to the fair. But while we were there, we visited the Grassy Knoll. We visited Dealey Plaza and the Texas School Book Depository and the location where President Kennedy was assassinated. And we listened to a variety of explanations for various things that occurred that day. At first, I thought this is not going to be interesting. It was fascinating. And I would encourage every American, if you ever get a chance, go spend a few days in Dallas, go to Dealey. It's part of our history. It's part of who we are as Americans because it happened. And I noticed this week some information was released from CIA or FBI or whoever is holding on to it. And apparently that information was mostly known, that Lee Harvey Oswald had in fact been to Mexico and visited the Soviet embassy. I don't know what that proves, but that was already out there. So anyway, for this week, I wanted a quote from John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who I think at the time, he was considered a progressive Democrat. I don't think he would qualify today, but he said, "Today we need a nation of Minutemen, citizens who are not only prepared to take arms, but citizens who regard the preservation of freedom as the basic purpose of their daily life and who are willing to consciously work and sacrifice for that freedom." I couldn't agree more. I just feel like we need to get back to that idea that freedom is not free. And if we ever lose it, I don't think we can get it back. Well, in any case, so much for that. But just a quote for this week. And we're also brought to you by Home Meteorite Shield. You can protect your home against deadly meteorite strikes for only $14.95 a month, which is a bargain. We now know that the risk of a comet hitting the Earth is greater than we thought before. Look at this, raining down debris for thousands of years. And here's Ann Hodges, November 1954. I was all of 4 months old when here came a meteorite right into her house. And there's a police officer to prove it. Here's an actual photo of one hitting the Earth. And how would you like to be directly under that? I don't think so. Protect your home against deadly meteorite strikes, only $14.95. And you can send that to ADAMS. Now, we're also brought to you by Peter Burke of Reliant Mortgage Solutions. And here are his many license numbers. Somehow, we wanted to make sure that we were in complete compliance with all the regulations regarding mortgage lending in Georgia and the United States, and we certainly are in compliance, and we're proud of that. Now you have a friend in the mortgage business. Pick up the phone, start the conversation, call Peter Burke, 678-557-9759, and they are our gold sponsor today. Quick housekeeping, turn off your cell phone. If you have a question, put it in Q&A, and we'll try to make time for Q&A. If you are not able to stay for the entire program, you can go to realestatecoffeebreak.com, and usually within a few hours of the program, we will have the replay available, and we will let you know. We'll send you an email when that happens. Please use the Q&A and not the chat, because the chat is not something we look at for Q&A. And of course, here's my question. Why don't we teach our young people today about personal finance? Why don't we teach our kids that if you don't find a way to make money while you sleep, you will work until you die? I heard recently that the way to make sure, if you are a young person today, there are only three things you have to do to guarantee that you will not live in poverty in the United States. Number one, finish high school. Number two, get a full-time job. And number three, don't get married or have children until you are 21 or later. And if you'll do those things, there's like a 98% chance that you will not live in poverty. And people we don't teach our kids that. How many kids don't get out of high school or even college and understand that they've got to find something to do? And I don't know, but anyway, love your thoughts on that in Q&A. The purpose of this program is to discuss your money and your real estate. And I believe that you can retire comfortably on as few as 10 little houses as rental units. Why do we invest in real estate? There are 5 reasons. It produces income. It gives you depreciation and other tax benefits. The equity builds up as the loans pay down. You can get appreciation in a variety of ways. Now, last year, we had 20% more or less appreciation. That's just an increase in value. That was forced on us by the pandemic and economics. I'm afraid that the current inflation is going to add more appreciation, not more than 20%, but it'll, on top of the 20%, we're going to be getting more in the next 12 months. But 20% a year is not sustainable. You just need to be aware of that. So if you're looking at your few little houses or your big portfolio or whatever you have, and you're saying, wow, I've got this huge appreciation and I'm going to get 20% a year from now on. I don't think so. Okay. There will be years where we get nothing. There may be years where the values go down. Remember that if you don't sell and the fair market value goes down, if you don't sell, there's no impact on you. And that's one of the great things about real estate as an investment. Prices are inelastic downward. What does that mean? That means if somebody's living in a house and it goes down in value, they don't have to sell. They can just stay there. And there's no impact on them. Okay. And finally, and this to me is the fabulous, and perhaps most important feature of residential real estate is it is relatively easy to leverage it so that you and I can, with a small amount of somebody's cash, not necessarily ours, but somebody's cash, we can control a huge investment. Okay. And that's where the real power is. And so that's why I say real estate is ideal. Of course, nothing is ideal, but compared to gold, compared to silver, compared to stocks and bonds and mutual funds, I think real estate just has way more advantages, but that's just me. Now, before we get into today's program, I want to review with you what we talked about last week. Do you remember we talked about appraisals and what an appraisal was? And I just want to revisit the 3 approaches to value. Okay. And here's what they are. Number 1, the comparable sale approach. We say there are 3 methods or there are 3 approaches to value of any residential real estate. Number 1 is comparable sale approach. What we're doing here is we are looking for homes that are similar in size, in location, in bedroom bath count, that have sold within the last year that will give us an indication of what the market might be willing to pay for the property being appraised, which we call the subject property. That's comparable sales. Number 2, there is the cost approach. And under the cost approach, The question is, if this house burned to the ground, if there was nothing left, even the foundation was gone, it's just a raw piece of land now, what would it cost to build back a modern functional equivalent? Not the exact same house, but probably if it was a 3-2, probably going to be a 3-2. If it had 1,800 square feet, probably it's going to have about 1,800 square feet. Okay, what was there? If it was built in 1930, like my house, you can't build back a 1930 house. We don't have 1930 materials, and who would want them? Some are very charming, but there's no insulation in my walls. I can tell you that. And I wish there was, because our heating bill is high. So the cost approach, what would it cost to build back a functional equivalent? And then finally, the income approach. And the income approach is most commonly used to estimate the value of rental property or commercial property or apartments, multifamily. And the reason I say that is the idea in the income approach is what positive cash flow, what income stream does this property produce on an annual basis? And in order to get a reasonable rate of return, how much money would you have to put in the bank at a reasonable rate of return to get this same stream of payments over the next X number of years? That is called the income approach. And it really is not appropriate for a detached single family home in a neighborhood of detached single family homes, which is pretty much where most single family homes are. And so the income approach, while it may be mentioned in a residential appraisal, often the appraiser will simply say, while the income approach was considered, it was not considered to be indicative of the market at this time. And that's because rarely do investors come in and buy a house in a residential neighborhood just for the cash flow. I mean, they're looking for appreciation, they're looking for tax benefits, blah, blah, blah. So the sales comparison approach is most commonly used in residential real estate. And in this approach to value, the property being appraised, remember that's the subject property, is compared to recently sold properties which are of similar type and style and size, and square footage is particularly significant. That's not the only thing that matters, but it is significant. Okay, so that's our appraisal review for today. I just wanted to bang that into you because last week we talked with Peter Burke about how the appraisal is used in the loan process, and that while the lenders cannot talk with the appraisers, you and I can. And if we are able to set an expectation in that appraiser's mind, especially before they have done their work, then we may have, I shouldn't use the word influence, but we can at least let them know of recent sales of which they may not be aware. How's that for being polite? Okay. I mean, are we trying to influence them? Well, heck yes. I want my property to appraise as high as possible. I'm sorry. Is that wrong? I don't think so. And I'm not doing anything nefarious. I'm just, there are high comps, there are middle of the road comps, and there are low comps. And I tend toward the higher comps. And some people tend toward low. Maybe you ought to have one of each of the three. I don't know. By the way, it's interesting to me, appraisers recently have been using a lot more comps. I saw one the other day that had 7 comparable sales. Most of them weren't really comparable, but I think he just wanted to prove he was doing his job. So, all right. Margie, are you with us? Because it's time to go to the mailbag. Margie says she will be here. We got an email. And by the way, if you would like to submit a question for the mailbag, if your question is selected, you will receive my warmest personal regards and a dozen yard eggs from the Georgia Egg Commission.
I'm here.
Oh, good. I'm glad. What we got an email to radio@money99.com. That's where you should send your questions or comments. Radio@money99.com. And Eric in Savannah said what?
John, is an investor and landlord, I feel I need a physical office location and a powerful computer. What do you think?
And what about a business license?
Oh, yeah.
He also asked if he was supposed to have a business license. Well, I think we need to talk about this. My answer is, Eric, it's time to join the 21st century. And I don't mean that in a harsh way. I mean that in a friendly way. But Eric, I think you are like so many folks, and like me, I was not born knowing all of this computer stuff. I rely on Margie heavily to help me understand how our communications works, how this radio show works, and how all of the different things that we're doing work. And I would suggest to you several things. First, I don't think you need an office, a physical office anymore. That went out with work from home. I think between Zoom and email and texting and voicemail, you can do your job as a landlord almost exclusively without visiting the property. Now, you're obviously at some point you're going to need to drop by there and make sure it's still there and hasn't been burned down. But that's beside the point. I don't think you need a physical office. I think you need a reasonable laptop and not a new one. I think you could get I've always said, Margie, what do we say about us and technological evolution?
That we like to be on the trailing edge.
You know, there are a lot of people I know that want to be on the cutting edge of technological evolution. That is very expensive. Marge, would we have any difficulty spending $20,000 on a couple of really cool laptops, one for you and me?
No, but I don't think I could stomach it.
You don't want it. Well, we buy a fair number, not all, but we buy a fair number of previously owned and reconditioned computers.
Especially desktop computers.
Especially desktop. But Margie, that white one in where you are?
Yeah.
Do you remember that was reconditioned?
No, I forgot that.
It was, and we got a fabulous deal on it. And I am convinced we got it for half price because somebody had bought it, decided they didn't want it, and returned it. I don't think they ever turned it on, but they sent it back to the factory. They tested it. They made sure it was brand new and then sold it to me for half price as a reconditioned computer. And I love it. And I don't think it costs more than $400 or $500. And I mean, and this is almost state of the art. So one, I don't think you need an office. Eric, I think an office is wherever you happen to find yourself that you have Wi-Fi. And by the way, that can be at a table at McDonald's.
That's right.
That can be, Margie, in the doorway of a shop on a Sunday afternoon in Munich,
Rome.
Germany.
Oh, no, I think it was in Rome.
Oh, you're right. It was in Rome. There were people staring at us.
But that was a long time ago. Internet's easier to get now.
Oh, I know, but we were we had a device that would tell us when we were near Wi-Fi. And we would go steal people's Wi-Fi out their window. And they didn't know. At least I hope they didn't know. So anyway, no office is needed. I would encourage you, Eric, to set as your goal to go completely digital. I don't see a reason for you to have any pieces of paper related to your landlording business or your investing business. And you're saying, what about contracts? All of those can be PDFs that have been digitally signed. What about lease documents? All of those can be PDFs which are digitally signed. What about copies of late notices? All of those can be PDFs which are digitally signed and then stored on a hard drive at Google for free. I do recommend, Eric, you become a Google fan. What are they calling it? Google Workplace now, Margie?
Something like that.
It's either Workplace or Workspace. It used to be Google Office or something like that, and they've changed the name. But it is when you get a Gmail account, anything gmail.com, you automatically get a selection of about 25 or 30 apps, including Google Drive, which is 15 gigs of storage, which is a huge amount, Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides. And that's enough to run an office. Now, you're going to say, wait a minute, that sounds sort of like Microsoft Office. Well, Microsoft Office is probably going to cost you $100 to $200 a year, depending on where you get it, whereas Google is completely free. And not only that, Google keeps coming up. Oh, by the way, calendar. I love the calendar and contacts. Margie, I'm leaving out a lot of stuff.
There's too much stuff to
list. There is. So I would encourage you to look at Google. However, Microsoft has their own thing. Apple has their own thing, although Google is platform blind, meaning Google doesn't care if you're on Apple or Microsoft or any other platform. It works because it's all in the cloud and you don't have to pay for it, which is really nice. And then you need to learn about how to use digital phone and email and SMS. You know, I never did texting until our contractors demanded it. All contractors prefer that their communications be in text, and that's because they receive it instantly, they can reply quickly, and they have a permanent record. So I'll get my contractor on the phone and say, hey, would you go by and take a look? I got a leaky faucet at so-and-so. And he says, just text me the address and tell me what you want me to do there. Also text me the tenant's name and their phone number. And bingo, I do it and they take care of it.
But you don't even do texting the normal way. You do that through Google also, Google
That's
Voice.
Correct.
And so it's all in your email.
That's correct.
So you don't even have to go to Google Voice or your phone or anything.
That's correct. It's very interesting the way communication seems to be coming together. But you said that 45 years ago. All right.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the business license. And I'm going to give you a technical term here, Eric. Screw the business license. And here is why. If you call the business license division, I dare you, call up and say you're Ralph from Ben Hill. I hope Ralph is listening. Ralph from Ben Hill had a show on WGST many, many, many years ago. and was a friend of mine. And he used to say things like, get off my yard, get off my lawn, get off my front yard, or something like that. But anyway, he was a curmudgeon, but a funny guy. But just call the business license. Don't let them have your phone number and say, this is Ralph from Ben Hill or Bob from Austell, and I'm a real estate investor. Do I need a business license? Before you have finished saying, do I need, the answer is going to be yes. Of course, they want you to have a business license. It's free money for them. Your position should be that you are a real estate investor. And of course, there's a little paperwork that goes along with that, but you don't need an office for anything. Okay. Just like you invest in the stock market, if you bought 100 shares of Ford Motor Company or 100 shares of Coca-Cola, do you realize you will be invited to the annual meeting in Delaware every year? You'll get email, a lot of email, actually. I happen to own just a few shares of Coca-Cola, and I get invited to the annual meeting, and I get quarterly reports and all this stuff. But I don't have to have an office for that, and I certainly don't need a business license. You as a landlord and or investor are no different than someone who invests in stock or mutual funds. You do not need a business license. Now, if you call them, they're going to tell you you do because you're running a business. But my response is, I'm not running a business. I am an investor, which is all the more reason for you not to have a business license, because if you have an office location, then they're going to say you have to have a business license. And then they're going to come around. Margie, what do they call that tax where they want you to pay on desks?
Oh, it's intangibles tax.
Intangibles tax, which doesn't amount to much, but it's just another thorn.
Oh, it's a real pain to report. You have to file a report every year.
And they want to come out and count the desks,
tax
count
return.
the filing cabinets, and oh, you've got computers. Those are expensive. And they add up the value of all the junk you have in your office, and then they just hand you a bill for being there. All the more reason for you to say, I don't have an office, I don't have a business, I don't need a business license, and no, you may not come out and inspect my home. And they won't offer to do that. I mean, they may try, but you can say no. So don't call the business license people, okay? So much for that. What else is going on? I think this is a good time. Why don't we do this? It is 37 minutes after the hour. This is a good time for John Mangum to join us. Is John out there somewhere, Margie?
Let me see if he's here.
And if not, we could talk to Peter.
All right, hold on.
I'll talk to whoever is available. I had asked, one of our mailbag questions was, what is a 1031 exchange? And rather than me trying to tackle this, I thought we'd get in touch with our friend John Mangum, who is a triple threat. He is a CPA, he is a realtor, and he is an investor. Maybe he's not a realtor. I don't know whether he is. I know he is a licensee of the Georgia Real Estate Commission. So that makes him a triple threat, but he is a specialist in 1031s as regional manager for Starker Services. And I wanted him to go over these rules because I thought it would be helpful, but we'll come back.
John, I don't see John Mangum, but Peter's here.
Oh, good. Well, in that case, watch this, boys and girls. I'm going to do this to
Hold on.
Pow. And Peter's going to join us.
And John Mangum, if you're there, please make sure your name is on so I can find you as an attendee.
He said he would be checking in between 11:30 and 12. So we'll see. But I'm going to stop sharing here for just a second. If I can figure out how to stop share. There we go. And hopefully Peter will join me. But we've got an interesting scenario to talk about. Peter and I had lunch yesterday at Gillies in Dunwoody. And Peter revealed that he walks 5 miles a day, which I'm so impressed with. And that's how Peter has managed to maintain his cute, girlish figure after all these years.
John, I can't promote him. I don't know what's going on, but I'll work on it.
You can't promote him. Do you want me to promote him?
Yeah, see if you can. You must have taken over the host.
I did take over the host.
Why do you do that?
I don't know. Why don't you take it back?
Okay.
All right. I am allowing.
You have caused problems ever since they added that feature.
I have promoted Peter to a panelist.
Thank you.
But I still don't see him. Oh, here he comes.
Good morning, John. Good morning, Margie, and everyone out there.
Peter, we are thrilled to have you with us on this, the week before Christmas. Yes. And one in which I am particularly thankful that, and this is just my personal belief, I think we are just about done with COVID and the 19 and Dr. Fauci and all of that. That's my hope.
I hope, I believe that's everyone's hope. That's everyone's hope.
I'm not sure of that. I think that, by the way, we don't have a picture for you. Is your camera not?
Well, it's because I'm in my car on a rainy stretch of Johnson Ferry.
Got it. No harm, no foul. Well, let's do this. Let's share that as a Christmas wish that everyone will be free of the worry of any type of infection in the year to come. I know that I don't mind sharing with you. You're always kind and ask about my mother, who is now 96. We were notified by the nursing home yesterday, Peter, afternoon, that they had experienced a new case of COVID, not among the patients, but among a staff member. And as a result, they have locked down the facility for 2 weeks.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
I am too. And at 96, I mean, bless her heart, she's had it and beat it.
Yeah.
The doctor said. So anyway, I just would love to see that move on for next year. But I'm going to share. You were talking with me yesterday, please, about, let's see here. There we go. About we won't go into details or use people's names, but somebody applied for a loan, an investor applied for a loan on the sale of something, and they provided too much information. How did that work? And I've labeled this slide, Peter, TMI, for too much information sent to the lender. So in a nutshell, Peter, what happened and what is the lesson we can take away?
Well, if you are getting a property at a substantial discount, because maybe there's an issue with the property, structural or otherwise, a seller's disclosure is not required for underwriting a loan. The contract is, but a seller's disclosure is not. If a seller's disclosure is part of the addendum, an underwriter is obligated to review it and ask questions. And in this disclosure, it was a known issue that there was a structural issue with the property. And an underwriter is required to ask for an engineering report to confirm that the property is structurally sound and safe.
Okay.
And in this case, an engineer went out and confirmed that it is, but then identified other problems that the engineer observed when he was out there and included it in his report, which was then provided to us, in which the lender asked for those items to be repaired. So my comment is, we're not obligated to see a seller's addendum, but if it's part of the contract addendum, it has to be there. We can't pull it out because it would be a missing addendum, but it's not a required item. And I believe in this situation, I said we'd prefer not to have the seller's addendum in there. And that went on deaf ears.
Well,
So
let me comment on it from a realtor's perspective. And I am a proud member of Georgia Association of Realtors. I think they all generally do a good job for the industry and provide a code of ethics that is worthwhile. That is not to say that I agree with everything they do. And the Georgia Association of Realtors, through their forms committee, has promulgated a plethora. Peter, I just used a 3-syllable word.
Yeah.
Plethora of documents that are being hoisted on agents as Georgia law.
Right.
And they are brokers all over Georgia are telling their agents that the seller's property disclosure statement is required by law. Now, the number one thing taught to agents at all levels is disclose, 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 which hopefully helps you from getting in trouble. But in this case, disclosing actually caused trouble, and it was not originally part of the agreement. And my point here is that the seller's property disclosure statement is a manufactured or promulgated document by GAR to protect realtors.
Correct.
And the concern that I have here is that the seller ended up having to, I'm guessing, pay several $1,000s for a repair that really was not part of the original agreement and was not under a contingency of an inspection.
Correct.
And instead was later revealed, which it really should not have been. So, folks, I'm not encouraged. Here's what the law says. The law says you must disclose any latent defect, and I'm going to come back and define latent defect of which you are aware or should have been aware. So, for example, if you've lived in the house for 20 years and the basement floods once a year, you should know, you either do know or you should have known that the basement flooded. Latent means it is not discoverable through a standard inspection. So if in the basement there are these watermarks that are very clear for everybody to see where the mud comes up to here, that is called a patent defect. It's right there in front of your face. Likewise, if the roof is bad, you don't have to disclose it because it's right there in plain sight. And this is where GAR and I part company, because if you asked me if the roof is in good condition and I've never lived there, I don't know. And I would like to honestly say, I do not know. GAR documents do not offer that as a response. And I don't feel good about it. And I don't think I, as the seller, should have to say, to the best of my knowledge, there is no damage to the roof, when frankly, I have no knowledge at all.
Right.
And I just want to be honest with people. I want people to do business with me again, but I don't want to send too much information to the lender. So if you don't know, you don't know. And we'll be talking more about this in weeks ahead. But I think the bottom line, Peter, would you agree? Do not over disclose.
Absolutely. Especially if you're getting a property a substantial discount and both the buyer and the seller are aware of the issue, then, talk amongst yourselves, but don't further over disclose the issue. It will just cause pain and agony to all parties.
Well, I assure you, part of my job is to avoid pain and agony at all costs. And so I will never over disclose. Peter, we've got to run, but I would encourage people that have any questions. This is a great time. This week is a great time to pick up the phone and start the conversation with Peter Burke and just talk a little bit about your mortgage position, possibility of restructuring loans, possibility of refinancing loans, and possibility of paying off some things that have substantially higher interest rates or loans that are at a higher rate with a new lower rate. And Peter, can they reach you at 678-557-9759?
I'm in my car. You're welcome to call me.
Or text. Now listen to this. Now you have a friend in the mortgage business.
Have a great weekend, everybody. Catch you next Saturday. Thank you.
Merry Christmas. We'll talk to you soon.
Christmas.
And thank you for lunch yesterday. Bye now.
No, my pleasure. Talk to you. Bye-bye.
Okay. All right. I'm going to stop the share here because I'm hoping that John Mangum can join us 51 minutes after the hour. Time flies when we're having fun, doesn't it? But don't over disclose. Boys and girls, you know better than that. It's just unnecessary. And this is with all due respect to my friend, Seth Weissman, who I've known for, I think, 35 years now. I have tremendous respect. He is one of the finest real estate lawyers, I think, in this part of the country. And I'm not taking anything away from him, but he operates under an agreement with the Georgia Association of Realtors. He's protecting his client. And I certainly understand that, and it's appropriate. But that doesn't make those documents right for you and for me. And I'm hoping John Mangum will join us here. His microphone is muted. His camera is off. But nonetheless, up, John Mangum, how are you, my friend? Yep. Nope, your mic's still off. You're muted. You're unmuted. So,
Merry Christmas, John Adams. How are you?
I am so excited. Margie has been naughty and I have been nice. And she gets a lump of coal and I'm getting all of my list filled out with presents under the tree.
I'm just going to check with her on that.
Well, there's a reason I've turned off her microphone.
No, you haven't.
Uh-oh.
John Mangums knows better, John.
We're in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, I think we need to share a screen right here and go directly. John, you have not been with us as much as I've hoped. Have you been busy lately? Is that what's going on with you, or
John,
you just don't love us anymore?
Oh, no. I love you more than ever. But this crazy residential market, prices are going up, rents are going up. The transaction volume is nonstop. Closings take longer, appraisals take longer, surveys take longer. Everything is stretched out, and you can tie a lot of that back to COVID and the pandemic. But I've been busier lately than I think I've been in years. A good kind of busy. Good busy.
Well, that's fantastic. Your day job, as you have said for years, is regional manager with Starker Services. Don't leave out that you also serve as a senior fellow and distinguished research professor at the Atlanta-based nonprofit Institute for Real Estate Policy.
Well, John, it's hard to rattle off all the titles you've bestowed. I keep it simple, and I just tell folks I'm the 1031 guy.
That's it. That's it. Well, we have a screen up where you have shared with me just some of the key points and of all the people I've ever heard describe 1031s. By the way, one, I don't think there's a topic about which there is more confusion. but the reality is, and what I've learned from you over the years, is that basically before you think about selling anything, you should at least look at a 1031 and see if that might be helpful or desirable. But would you walk us through briefly, and I know that's a challenge, but you're up to it, what are some of the key rules here?
So, John, your slide does an excellent job of sort of condensing a lot of tax code, tax regulation, court cases, and things that would make people go to sleep. 1031 exchange, also called a like-kind exchange. And there you go. The very first rule, the very first point, it's got to be like-kind property. Now, what that means for the IRS is it's not rental house for rental house, condo for condo, land for land. It has to do with your next point, investment. And so a like-kind property, real property held for investment, could be a rental house, or it could be raw land, or it could be an apartment building or a warehouse, commercial property. It's really the largest area of opportunity that we have as investors. If you are collecting rental houses and the years go by, you want to sell them and do a 1031 exchange, you can sell them. You structure the 1031 exchange prior to the sale, and you've got to acquire like-kind replacement property for investment or for business purposes, like you put your company in the building. And so investment property doesn't stratify residential, it doesn't stratify zoning, it doesn't stratify by geographic. You don't have to do a Georgia property for a Georgia property. This is federal tax law, and this is an explanation of the regulations that support the code section numbered 1031, and it deals with all real property held for investment is like other real property, real estate held for investment. So the first and probably the best rule to really wrap your head around is any kind of real estate. And just a subset of this, while we're on this one, because this is such a good point. A lot of people look at vacation property, and that
Right.
market has risen also. The IRS knows that we're buying vacation properties, we're condos at the beach and cottages in the mountains and things.
Sure.
That property can be held for investment. And there's even a little vacation harbor a vacation ruling safe harbor that says you can use a vacation property some of the time. Some of the time is defined as 2 weeks per year for 2 years following or preceding the exchange. So even a property that you use personally a little bit can be considered like kind for a 1031 exchange. Like kind is really very broad. And that's why I like to spend a lot of time on that point.
Okay.
So I want to move down the chart. Like kind and held for investment are hand in glove. They absolutely work together. The next item is replacement property should be of equal or greater value. And that is super simple. If you're selling a rental house for $250,000, you've got to buy a replacement property for $250,000 or greater. The confusing point we hear in the market is if you bought that rental house for $100,000 years ago during the downturn, and you think your profit is $150,000, and you say, I want to exchange my gains of $150,000, that's not correct. You've got to exchange the full value. In this example, $250,000.
And can that be spread over more than one property, or does it have to be just one property?
John, that's a good point, and it actually loops back into like kind. Like kind does not specify quantity. In other words, if your replacement property, if you're buying a pair of houses at 125 apiece, and you sold a relinquished property for $250, It's math. You just add them up. You could buy 5 houses at 50,000 apiece. Of course, those things don't seem to be available in today's market.
Well, here's
Now-
my question. If somebody has had a house, a little rental house, I mean, in many places, John, we got 20% appreciation last year. If somebody is sitting on a $400,000 or a $500,000 rental house and they're saying, I can't get enough rent to justify this investment, would one strategy be to sell that and replace it with more than one lower priced property that might generate a higher percentage of value as revenue?
John, you know, as investors, pardon me, let me just get that screen back up. As investors, we're always looking and we're conscious of cash flow, and the requirement for positive cash flow is always there. The general rule is, as you go up the value level, as your property goes from 200 to 300 to 500 to $1 million and more, the rent ratio, the rent you can get on that property decreases. So when your property is worth $1 million, it might make good sense to sell the million and buy 5 $200,000 houses, because those houses will rent for $1,500-1,600 a month, and the $1 million property may only rent for $3,000 a month. So
well, and there's almost an artificial ceiling on rentals, at least residential, because if somebody's got $3,000 a month disposable income, they're probably going to talk about buying something, aren't they?
many of them will talk about buying, but what we've seen in this recent 12-month market is that people are renting. They're selling their existing residence, cashing out and taking the big bucks, and they're coming to rent houses. There's a shortage of multifamily housing. There's a shortage of houses to buy. And there are people who are saying, I'm going to rent for a year or two and wait until I can find the right property. So we've never seen as good a demand from tenants in the face of increasing rent rates.
Wow. This is a crazy time. I've been in this game. I got my license, I think, in 78, and I have never seen a time like this. And
John, it's amazing. And we've seen a tremendous increase in the 1031 business.
I believe
the slide we're focused on, these are the questions that I get asked every day.
So what is boot? I don't understand what boot is.
So boot, the story I was told, and it has some merit, I think, back in the days when people were horse trading, and you literally rode into town, your horse was tired, you went to the horse dealer, and you said, I need another horse to ride out in the morning. And the dealer said, well, you can have this good horse. If I'm going to take your tired horse in, what will you give me to boot? And the cowboy would give him a gold coin. The horse dealer would put that coin in his boot. But what the dealer got was something that was not like what was traded in. He didn't get more horses. He got a gold coin. And so in the translation of what does that do in the world of 1031 exchange, boot is something you would receive in a transaction that is not real property. Generally, it would be cash.
Right.
And for a totally tax deferred exchange, back to my example, you're selling a property for $250, you've got to buy a replacement for $250 or more. But if the money in the exchange escrow account, let's say for whatever reason, you didn't spend all the money, you had 10,000 left over. When that 10,000 comes back to you, that would be boot, and that would be taxable. So 2 points here.
But of the 200 or whatever, that's a very small amount of the transaction that is now taxable, right?
Well, exactly right, John. So the first point, to be totally tax deferred, you can't take any boot.
Got it.
But if you're selling a 250 property, I tell people don't put the bar at 250 and above. Don't go look in multi-list for houses that start at 250 or 125. Look a little below, because there might be a killer deal sitting out there at 239.9. And it's not the worst thing in the world to pay a little bit of tax just on the differential, the 10,000 in this example.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, let's forge ahead, because we're coming up against the clock here. Must involve same taxpayer. What does that mean?
So, John, if you're the taxpayer selling an investment property, you must be the taxpayer buying the replacement. That's pretty simple when it's just you. But sometimes you're selling a house that you bought many years ago, and you and Margie want to go into a replacement property, but Margie isn't the taxpayer who starts the exchange. You've got to be careful there and keep the ownership the same. So if you sell for $250 and you buy for $300, but you bring Margie in as a co-owner, the IRS will allocate half the value to her, and you will not have fully exchanged a $250 because you only got a $150.
Yikes. There's a lot to think about here, isn't there?
There is. And,
what is
and
this?
We see this with partnerships and LLCs, where you've got an LLC that's selling a property, and there are 2 or 3 members, and on the back end, you want to just take the replacement by yourself, and that's problematic.
Okay.
So that's why that rule exists.
Now, what is a 45-day identification window? What does that mean?
It is the biggest obstacle that the stinking IRS put out there that we have to manage every single day. They have restricted the time period you have to complete this lucrative tax exchange technique. And what they say is, from the day you sell and close on the sale of your relinquished property, you've got 45 days to identify uniquely in writing. Typically that's street address, but it could be parcel ID, street address, city, state, zip. That will uniquely identify it. Parcel ID, county, state, that will uniquely identify it. But you essentially have to choose what you will buy within 45 days. And that compresses the time that you really have to operate in the world of the 1031 exchange. You've just got to get this job done very, very quickly.
Wow. And so does that mean you cannot start looking ahead of time?
Actually, John, the most prudent thing an investor can do is the day he puts the relinquished property on the market, you start shopping for replacement property.
Wow.
And the day you go under contract to sell your $250,000 rental, you start making offers. I believe there's a phrase, you got to see a lot of houses and make a lot of offers.
Yes.
And so you start making offers on properties that you would want to acquire. John, a well-executed exchange, you have a total of 180 days. That's the last rule in the sequence here. But a well-executed exchange is one where you are literally in and out in a period of 30 to 60 days, because you have found your replacement property, you execute on the sale of your relinquished, the funds go into escrow held by a third party, a qualified intermediary, and then a few weeks later, 2, 3, 6 weeks later, you buy the replacement property, totally tax deferred.
Very interesting. I know people are going to have questions. I have taken the liberty of putting your toll-free number. Believe it or not, we now have viewers and listeners who are outside the Atlanta metro area. And so I just took the liberty of putting the 800 number up. Is that okay?
That is absolutely okay. We'd be happy to take calls, and we operate on the basis of a no obligation phone consultation. Tell us what you're selling, tell us what you're thinking. We can explain the rules and answer your questions.
And you also have a little black brochure that is also available, I think, in PDF format. I'll bet he's going to just pick it up and show us what it looks like. But I can tell everybody listening, this brochure, there it is very helpful. I would say it bridges the gap between what you see on the slide, which is a real distillation of the process, and a full working knowledge, which I'm not sure any of us can hope to have. But it certainly gives us more details and will help guide and direct us. John Mangum, thank you, and Merry Christmas to you, and a prosperous New Year. Why do I get the feeling that you are just cleaning up during this recession, during this period of inflation?
John, I went into the beginning of this year thinking the prices were too high. I wouldn't find anything to buy. I'll just say that I've bought several properties this year. I've had some successes, and I'm thrilled that I'm fortunate to have them.
One of those, boys and girls, was Cherokee Townhouses, where he bought like 800 units or so. I don't know. You have left the the average investor behind, John?
I wouldn't say that. I
Okay.
spend time on programs with you to make sure everybody knows what I know.
Well, I appreciate it, and our listeners always appreciate your great advice. Starker Services is to be commended for really engaging in a powerful educational outreach, and you have been on the cutting edge of that, and thank you for that. And we look forward to having you again real soon.
John, thank you very much, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, sir. Bye now.
Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
We are now going to stop share, and we're going to go right here, and we're going to have an intermission. So if I press this and that, hopefully South Pacific will begin. We'll be right back in 4 minutes. Well, we are running late, so I'm going to cut our intermission a little bit short here and move directly ahead. Let's see where we are. All right. And we've got Ian Robbins is going to be joining me, my evil twin, who is the leader of the landlord subgroup of Georgia Real Estate Investors Association. And Margie will figure out how to get him. Let's see if I can see him here. I'm going to have to go to participants and go down here. Ian, I see you, but I'm still not sure how to promote you. See, I just, this doesn't make any sense to me. Huh. Somebody needs to explain this to me. Panelists, attendees. All right. Well, Margie will figure out how to do it. In any case, Ian will be joining us soon. And I wanted to talk a little bit about actually several things. Our friend Hans Trupp in beautiful St. Simon's Island, the crown jewel of Georgia's coastal empire, sent me a news story this morning, which I'm going to go try to find because I think you would be interested in it. And I'd like to just talk about it for a second, but I've got to figure out how to get there. Let's go here, there, and here. No, that didn't. Oh, okay. Now I see. Okay. And here's what Hans sent me. That's not it. Oh, here it is. This is crazy. Wait till you see this. Watch this. I don't know where he found this, but this is San Francisco, California, which is fruit and nut land. And let me tell you, there's never been a place as crazy as San Francisco. It's it is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen on earth. It really is spectacular to be on a balcony. You've got these hills all around this beautiful bay, and you go out on a balcony, and to see all of this and the ships and the Golden Gate Bridge over there, and it's just beautiful, spectacular. I can certainly see why people would want to live there. But look at this. Landlords getting nailed with huge $1 million settlements for sham owner move-in evictions. And I looked at that. Hans sent this to me. I looked at it, I said, what in the world is this all about? Margie, are you finding Ian for me? Ready right now. And it says 2 record-setting settlements of more than $2 million apiece in recent months, where the settlement cost more than the house itself, are putting a chill on the old owner move-in eviction runaround. Now, I said, what the heck what is the old owner move-in eviction runaround? Evictions are way down during the pandemic, primarily because they've been mostly illegal, thanks to stupid things. Hi, Ian. Glad to have you with us. It says here, this also includes the often dubious owner move-in eviction, wherein landlords can evict tenants because they or a family member are moving into a unit, and the owner sometimes generates an implausible number of relatives to evict as many rent-controlled tenants as possible. Now, all of a sudden, I'm saying, how can this be in Georgia? Well, obviously, it can't be Georgia, because this is rent control. And it doesn't surprise me that San Francisco has rent control, because go ahead.
Can you help me and our listeners understand what is rent control and how is this getting around the law? I'm interested because I read that article too, and I just didn't understand it. So maybe you can help us.
And this is my understanding, Ian, because I've never operated under rent control. But as you know, Margie and I love New York City. We have been to Manhattan many times. I like to just sit outside a sandwich shop and watch the world go by. There's nothing greater to me. And by the way, I would say this to anyone in our viewing or listening audience. If you have never been to Manhattan, you owe it to yourself to visit New York City. It's like night and day from any other place I've ever been. It's literally a city that never sleeps. And it's just, I find the people delightful. Now, are they brusque? Yes. But that's just being a Yankee. They don't mean anything by it. And what I have found is, one, if you're willing to meet them on their terms, and two, if you're willing to act like where they live is someplace special, because they think it is, and it is. But if you are knocking New York, they're going to be unhappy with you, and you will not have a good time. So, Ian, have you been to New York City?
Sure. I was born in Long Island. I have relatives.
I did not know that.
Yeah, we really like New York. You're exactly right. New York City is its own heaven, my brother would say, and it's a wonderful place.
Well, it is, but it does have some features that I just don't understand. So, Ian, you and I are in the same boat. One of them is rent control. And my understanding of rent control is that if you are a landlord and somebody moves into one of your rental units, they can stay there indefinitely. And I'm talking about 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, and you can only raise the rent by a very small amount that is decided by the government. The city of New York or Department of Housing or somebody will let you know how much you can raise the rent, if any. And so you end up with these people who can't afford to move because they've been there for a long time. You may remember the television show Friends, with three young couples or six friends, and two of them, Monica and whatever the other one, lived in her grandmother's apartment, even though she was not supposed to. The claim was that the grandmother was still there, even though she, I think, had gone to her reward, but I'm not sure. But apparently there's a lot of this that goes on. And at least in San Francisco, one way that a landlord can evict a rent control tenant is to say, I am the owner and I'm going to move in, or a member of my family is going to move in. Now, get this, Ian, you won't believe this. Because I thought, wow, you what, give them 30 days and they have to be out? No, it's not quite that simple. I listen to this. This is a unique San Francisco phenomenon, thanks to legislation from Supervisors Aaron Peskin, who I don't know, and Jane Kim, which required landlords to declare under penalty of perjury that they or a family member did indeed move in, and then gave tenants a 3-year window in which they could sue if they thought the move-in was dishonest.
Wow, 3 years. That's a long time.
That's sort of a nice look back provision, isn't it? So in these two cases, there was a $2.6 million settlement on one of them. The attorney for the landlord, of course, claimed that the evicted tenants were disgruntled former tenants who, after failing to extort an exorbitant cash payment from the defendants before moving out, now seek to secure payment through frivolous litigation. So what this says to me, and Ian, I'd sort of like your response on this or your thoughts. Apparently, it's not unusual for landlords to go to the tenant and say, I will pay you a sum of money to get out.
Well, there are times when we do that. Better to pay cash for keys than to have them be in there.
Exactly. But I've never heard of cash for keys more than about maybe $500 max. And I've had success just holding up $100 bill and saying, you see this? Would you like this? And they say yes. And I say, I'll meet you here at noon on Saturday. If you can have the place cleaned out and no trash on the street, I'll give you this. And they'll do it sometimes. Now, but apparently this person supposedly was attempting to extort, which is a pretty tough word, an exorbitant cash payment. So anyway, there were these two cases, but apparently it's the same attorney. And the reason that the settlements were made was that look at this, insurance companies are reluctant to go to trial given the one-sided nature of local law and the risk if the owner loses. In other words, they were afraid, Ian, that it would be more than $2 million if it actually went to court.
Crazy. I'll tell you what, insurance companies are very much into settling than going through a lawsuit. That's for sure.
Well, I don't know if this is related to the smash and grab mentality that we've seen, especially in San Francisco, but I can't help but think that it is, at least tangentially, this whole idea of nobody's responsible for anything. And I wouldn't want to do business in that town. I'm thankful that Georgia is at least reasonable on this thing. So anyway, let's see. All right, well, let's move on. I would like for you to take the lead here on a question where you and I had a conversation regarding the killer lease and the words guarantor versus cosigner. What was the issue? And then let's talk about it.
Well, John, I so much appreciate the killer lease because it's made me money. So
Good.
thank you. And I highly recommend it to everybody listening because it's just got years of experience, got the right legalese, and law involved. So it says so much. The question comes up because there's a section in the killer lease that I didn't understand about what a guarantor was. And John, your answer was very good. I had to read it a couple of times, but there is a distinction between a guarantor and a cosigner. And I think one of those things was the rights that a cosigner has as opposed to a guarantor.
Exactly.
So
Yeah, well, it's interesting because when I sit down with our attorneys, our legal team, they always bring up things that I think are irrelevant. But once I get into it, oh, that is a good point. And this stemmed from the definition of the words guarantor versus the definition of the word cosigner, not in Georgia, but in some other states. And so in some other states, if you have on your lease, obviously what we're trying to do here is to get somebody else on the hook for the rent. That's the key. Especially if you're renting to, as we do sometimes, young people who have, their lives change, and things happen. And I'm not attacking anybody. I'm just saying it's not unusual if we have like a graduate student or even two graduate students for us to ask if their parents would be willing to be guarantors. And usually they are. They're willing to. All they're saying is, I am willing to be financially responsible for the payments that are due under this lease agreement, because if the tenants or if the residents don't, you can fall back on me. I guarantee it. Now, in some states, you would think a cosigner would be the same thing. But in some states, a cosigner inherits all the rights and privileges of the tenant, including occupancy, including, confronting you, including going into court, all of these things that really we don't want the parents to do. All we want them to do is write a check, go home to daddy, get some money, and pay the daggone rent. So a guarantor is more of a, I guess you could say, financial backer than a cosigner, which might be an occupant, an additional occupant, or someone who might have rights. Now, that brings us then to the next issue, which is you'll see in the killer lease a reference to the guarantor agrees that it is not necessary for the landlord to seek all avenues of payment from the tenant prior to invoking the requirement of the guarantor to pay the rent. In some states, guarantors have argued successfully that they have no responsibility financially until all possibilities of collection against the original tenant have been exhausted. And in anticipation of that, our attorneys recommended that we simply write in there that the guarantors understand that they still have a financial obligation regardless of the state of collection from the original occupants or tenants. Does that make sense?
Then that is excellent, because you're basically saying we don't have to exhaust everything first before we go to you. You're in the boat pretty quickly, and we need to get paid. And I think, John, that I think time is our enemy when they don't pay, because people are still in the house. Now, when they're out of the house is a whole another story. But if they're still in the house and you haven't been paid, every day that goes by, there's big problems. You still got to pay the mortgage.
Absolutely.
Have access to the home, and they can damage the home, and you're still responsible for repairs. So I really appreciate, I didn't understand it, but now I understand in in the killer lease, the last time I used it, I just really didn't do anything with it. Apparently, it was the right thing. But now, if I'm asked about it, I'll know, would you like to add a guarantor to this? And they'll either tell me yes or no. But
Well, one of the things you have taught me is one, the whole concept of seeking additional earnest money or security deposit to protect you, which I think is brilliant. But in addition to that, here, if someone is relatively young, this is simply a recognition that parents are used to backing up their kids. I mean, that's not unusual. And so during the application process, there's nothing to prevent you from saying, look, we are very close on getting you an approval, but if we could get your mom and dad to sign as guarantors, that we'd never even communicate with them. You are going to pay the rent on time, aren't you? I've never in 40 years had anybody say, no, I'm usually late. That has never happened. And so they're going to say, sure, I'll pay the rent on time. Then mom and dad I won't even contact them. But that just would give the owner here additional assurance and allow them to rent to you under this circumstance.
John, I have a question on that, though, because I've always wondered about if the parents or the guarantor is out of state. What do you tend to think about that? Wouldn't I have to find an attorney in Tennessee and then go after that guarantor or somewhere else? How do you do that?
What I would do in that case, and again, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not giving anybody legal advice. I would go ahead at that point and file suit in the county where the property was located. I think there's a case to be made that that county has jurisdiction because the property is located in this county. And I would name as defendants not only the tenants, but also the guarantors. And so what I'm doing is trying to drag the parents and their social security number and date of birth into a lawsuit, even if it's in Fulton County, Georgia, or Cobb County, Georgia. That will appear on their credit report. And they can deny it all they want, but I've got a copy of the lease with their signature on it. And what I have found, we had a situation without identifying anyone. We had a young man who, when he was on the wagon, presented himself pretty well. And we rented a 1-bedroom apartment to him, and he did just fine. However, he had a real bad habit of smoking too much marijuana. I think any marijuana is too much, but he did that, and he would do it so that the other people in the building could smell it, which is not, look, what people do on their own time is their business. I'm not trying to be like the morality police here, but one, we don't allow any smoking in our rentals, and certainly not a drug that is right now illegal, at least in the state of Georgia. Again, whether it should be or not is not my issue. And he also, after he had a progressive emotional problem, and he was hoarding for a while. So we had actually seen inside that literally he had filled up the house with junk. And as you know, that's not a healthy lifestyle. It leads to all kinds of problems. So we tried to contact him. Well, he wouldn't even return calls, wouldn't come to the door. Very difficult to deal with. Ian, we contacted, his father had signed as a guarantor. His father was a senior executive with a major, I'm just going to say, Fortune 500 company here, based here in Atlanta with their world headquarters. You can make any chumps of logic that you'd like. And we had a money order the next day.
Wow, that's great.
Because Dad did not want trouble. And Dad had plenty of money. And Dad had pleaded with us to rent to this guy in the first place. And I said, well, Mr. So-and-so, if you'll be a guarantor, we'll go out on a limb for you. He paid it. And we had to work with him to get the son the help he needed to live somewhere else, but he couldn't continue living there with the problems that he had. So
That's
anyway.
perfect, John. So it does work, but I'm just going to have to put in the Ian version, and that not everybody's got that strong of a guarantor, and sometimes the guarantor ain't too good anyway. So I have a question on that. John, do you require an application on the guarantor? I mean, it's not about making money.
Not a full application, but we do request the full name, full mailing address, social security, and date of birth. And
are you allowed to check their credit though? Do you require any type of payment?
I could, but I never have. I could, but I never have. We usually will have a telephone conversation with mom or dad and just say, look, we want your children to be happy. And this is typically when the renter is under 25 and really still has a sort of lifeline to mom and dad. And mom and dad say, yeah, we'll make it good. And they know they're on the hook, and they know that that's not unusual. So it has just been helpful to us on occasion. So anyway, all right, Ian, I want to move on and talk a little bit about repair and deduct, because
John,
you
before
brought,
you do that,
yeah,
just comment on something that Peter had said the last hour.
yes.
So you were talking about something you taught me many years ago. I sent you an email and you wrote back, I don't know. And I needed to learn that term. And so I made a list. I just want to run it by and we'll get right back to repair and deduct. But things that I say now, I don't know. I appreciate you giving me permission to do that, John. I needed that from the right source. I sincerely mean that. So if somebody asks me about crime, lead-based paint, mold, even the utilities that service the property and how many people have applied, all of those, I get to say, I don't know about crime. I don't know about the lead-based paint. That's on the disclosure that you guys were talking about. I certainly don't know about mold. They're allowed to do a inspection that I'm not going to pay for, okay, before they move in. I don't certainly know the utilities because I don't live there. I'm just the property manager. And also, how many people have applied? I used to get intimidated by that question, but now I've got to the point of it's none of their business, and they're allowed to mail in applications. So therefore, I can look them in the eye and say, I don't know, because I don't know what's in the mail, and I don't check the mailbox that often, at the PO box. Your thoughts?
I agree wholeheartedly. It's interesting to me because partially, Ian, I see this as a GAR attempt to manipulate the disclosure requirements in Georgia. And interestingly, in 2015, my good friend Seth Weissman, who is a brilliant attorney and one of his clients is Georgia Association of Realtors, and he helps them with their contract documents. In 2015, on the extensive seller property disclosure statement, you had every question had three options. And so it would say, is there a problem with lead-based paint? Yes. Please explain. No. And I don't know. And I always thought, if I don't know, I don't know. And I just want to disclose, I don't know. Well, in 2016, guess what disappeared? The third column option, which was I don't know. And it is the position of the Georgia Association of Realtors. And I've heard agents say this to sellers, you have to fill it out and you have to answer yes or no because you are answering to the best of your knowledge. Is there any lead-based paint? My point is, if I say no, I may have perjured myself. I may have put the buyer in an awkward position. If they rely on my statement that I don't think there's any lead-based paint there, I don't know. And I think it is more helpful, more honest, and more straightforward to simply say, I have never lived in this property and I've never tested it for lead-based paint and I don't know. Might have
Now-
lead-based paint, might not.
And you know what? That's more honest than saying yes or no. I mean, I can't really understand why they came up with that, but that's above us, I guess.
Well, I can tell you why they came up with it. It was an attempt to get the seller on the hook so that the realtor won't be sued. Guess who will be sued? The seller,
Seller, right.
or in this case, the landlord. And so what I do to this day is when confronted with that, beside yes, no, I put an asterisk, and the asterisk goes to a paragraph I've typed at the bottom that says seller or landlord has limited or no knowledge regarding this topic.
Excellent.
And that if this area is of concern to purchaser or renter, they have sought and obtained independent advice relative thereto. And what that does is it says, look, if you're concerned about lead-based paint, you need to get a licensed lead inspector. I'm not that. I can't do that for you. If you're concerned about crime in the neighborhood, you need to go talk to the police, not me. I
But
don't
John,
live there.
I have two questions on that because
Yeah.
I got to back up from the landlording point of view because on the tape many years ago, you instructed Ian Robbins right there. You were talking to me in my tape player. Just check, I don't know. So I think about you every time I put that form, and I really don't know. So I'm glad it's still on the government form, unless I'm using an old form. But I have a feeling it's accurate. So I would say to our listeners, or John, I should confirm with you: is it still appropriate for our leases to put I don't know on the lead-based paint?
In my opinion, it is. And in the opinion of the attorneys that have reviewed the killer lease, it is actually more honest to say, I do not know, than to say, to the best of my knowledge, there is not a problem here. That's the same question as, is there a sinkhole on this property? I've never seen one, but you and I both know from watching these terrible pictures in Florida, for some reason, they can just show up and consume a house, and it doesn't seem to have been caused by anything. I don't know, but I'm certainly no expert on sinkholes. Is there a gasoline tank buried somewhere on this property? I don't know. I didn't bury a gasoline tank, and I've never seen one there. But all these things, the people want me to warrant or want me to guarantee is or is not the case, and I'm not in a position to do that. And by the way, unless you are using my forms, you do not have the opportunity to put I don't know. If you are, in my opinion, if you are required to use a form that limits you to yes or no, I would add as an answer an asterisk and have that asterisk make reference to a paragraph that says the seller has limited or no knowledge regarding this question.
And John, has that worked? In other words, I get it. I think our listeners get it. But let's say that asterisk and that paragraph goes to the broker on the other side. And I'm curious what type of response you've gotten from the broker on the other side when you know the law, they know the law. Apparently, they're the broker, not the salesperson. And what type of response have you received?
I have gotten pushback on more than one occasion from people who call and say, you can't put, I don't know, that's not an option. Yes, it is an option. And I explained to them that I am unable to answer yes or no because I have limited knowledge of the property. I've never lived there. I think part of the problem, Ian, is that particularly newer agents confuse the Georgia Association of Realtors contract forms with Georgia landlord tenant law. And that is one of the reasons that I wrote the killer lease, because the GAR lease, and for that matter, all of the forms, are, in my opinion, primarily designed to protect and promote the company or the entity that paid for them, which is the Georgia Association of Realtors. I think that's entirely appropriate. I'm not accusing anybody of doing anything inappropriate. All I'm saying is GAR documents are not required by law. And if anybody says they are simply incorrect. And my goal is to disclose, especially on a sale, to disclose any latent defect of which I am aware or should be aware. If I do that and I do it proactively, I have performed my duty under Georgia law as a seller.
And John, I appreciate that. And in that discussion in the last hour, I appreciate the word between latent and patent. I've always looked at the patent as what, we think of patents as unique devices, but you've also, of course, has another definition, and a patent defect would be something very obvious where you can't see the sinkhole or the roof is it's got a tarp on it.
The classic example is the basement where you've got a mud line 3 feet up. Every summer it floods, and you can see that it's flooded in years past. Whether you know it or not, you should have known that. And you better say, I think the basement floods from time to time, but it's dry now. That puts people on notice. That's a fair thing to require, because they might not notice that, I guess. I don't know. I mean, it's right in front of them. But anyway, disclosure.
One thing about basement flooding, I bought a house and we're doing our cleanup, and it took a lot of work to get the house ready. And we found a sump pump in the basement and found out later that there was a lot of flooding. But sure enough, within a month after the customer moved in, he had a flood. I said, well, I'll tell you what you do. Just go over to that switch over there and let's see what happens. And he said, Ian, it worked perfectly. And the water went out. And that doesn't usually work in my life, but it did. And he said, it's fine. And apparently the sump pump was installed correctly and it did its job. One other issue on that, though, on I don't know, one of the things to be responsible is a couple of weeks ago, I was about to dig. And again, don't pride myself in any way of being a repair person, but I was actually digging somewhat close to a box, a utility box. And it did even hit on my thick brain that this may not be a good idea. And sure enough, there's a whole industry. It's a big deal to call before you dig. There's a whole number, 811, and you're not supposed to know what's underneath there. And
not only that, they don't charge for that. That is a public service. That's where isn't this where they put the little flags out?
And they paint areas. And sure enough, you know what I did? It turned out I was right for the wrong reason. I stopped. I found something else to do. It was very fine. The tenant knew what I was doing. I said, I'm just not ready to do what I need to do yet until I call 811. And I did, and they came right out. They used the orange spray paint, whatever. We did it safely. But I would imagine in any situation, as easy as putting up a fence, if a customer says, can I put up a privacy fence here? You're allowed to say, I don't know. I don't know what's underneath the ground. I mean,
sure.
That's
exactly right. And of course, I always hate to hear, it's usually once or twice a year in Metro Atlanta, somebody with a backhoe digs into a water main,
Oh, yeah.
and hopefully nobody gets hurt, but they've got this 60-foot high geyser and the road is completely washed away. And of course, were that, heaven forbid, an electric line or maybe even worse, a natural gas line, the very dangerous situation. And I think they're just trying to avoid that. So good advice there. All right. I want to get to this repair and deduct because I think it's a very interesting issue. Do you have the question? Because I couldn't find the question.
I don't have the question, but I think our concept is if somebody has a plumbing problem and calls their own plumber and gets it fixed and then takes it off of the rent the next month, is that acceptable?
That's the question, because a lot of tenants believe in their heart of heart that if they ask for a repair or an improvement and it does not happen on the schedule that they wish it to happen, that they have a God-given right to go ahead and do it and just deduct it from the rent. The first thing I want to say is, and that is called a repair and deduct procedure. First, you need to know that there are states where the repair and deduct procedure is recognized and authorized by state code or by local or municipal code, or both. One would be California. And of course, California tends to be sort of a bellwether state, if you will, for consumer rights, especially in real estate. However, in Georgia, there is no reference period to repair and deduct in either the Georgia Code or Georgia landlord tenant law. There's no reference to it. So what that means is it's up to a judge. Now, what I'm here to tell you is that routinely in Georgia, judges will recognize a tenant's right to repair and deduct to a greater or lesser degree, depending upon how they have documented the situation and how the landlord has reacted. In other words, it may be allowed based on the facts and circumstances of the case, which is what every case is essentially, but there's no statutory definition here. So what are we talking about? The killer lease specifically says that the tenant is not allowed to undertake their own repairs, and they're not allowed to cause repairs to be done and then ask the landlord to pay for it. And that if they do that, they will have to pay for it. Okay? Because they did it without.
That is such great advice, just so much value to this show, because I got a little confused with something you brought out a couple of weeks ago, because you sort of went into it, about how you can get some estimates and notify the landlord. But the fact that you've stated clearly there's no statutory
basis
in Georgia 44-7, to me, I tend to listen to the guy who thinks he's an expert, and he'll say, well, 5 years ago, I owned a whole bunch of rental property and this is the law. Not according to John Adams and not according to Georgia 44-7. And I don't care what your cousin says. So thank you, John. You just verified that, and I so much appreciate that. And the second thing is you put it in the lease.
Yeah.
So it's a direct violation of the lease. So now you're on the front side of it. That's fantastic.
Well, let me just share with you, and I want to follow up on what we talked about a couple of weeks ago. A tenant might be, and I'm now pretending to be a judge, which I certainly am not, but a tenant might be in a position to justify a repair and deduct during a lawsuit, and this could be an eviction, so it's a dispossessory action, which comes very quickly under Georgia state courts compared to Superior Court. If they notified the landlord, and that notice would have to be compliant with the requirements of notice in the lease. In other words, they can't just call up and leave a message that says, my water heater's busted, and if you don't have it fixed by Sunday, I'm going to go ahead and have it done. You got to pay for it. They don't even say that. But my sense is that if the tenant gives the landlord adequate notice, multiple notices, and contacts them, and then finally says, you have 7 days to cause this to happen, or you must contact me and explain what the problem is. So, for example, let's say it was some particularly odd kind of water heater that simply could not be replaced with a generic water heater. I'm making this up as I go, but if it were something that for some reason the landlord might have been tearing his hair out trying to get it, but they're back ordered, they're all off the coast of the Port of Los Angeles, and you can't buy a hot water heater for love nor money, that's where, and you and I've talked about this 100 times, communication comes in. If it is clear to the court that, one, the property was being made uninhabitable, and hot water is basic for habitability, not air conditioning, but hot water. 2, adequate and provable notice was given to the landlord. 3, adequate and provable period of time was allowed. And 4, finally, I think a demand would have to be made in writing that says, I contacted you on August 1st. I contacted you on September 1st. It is now October 1st. You have still failed to do this. I haven't heard from you. And if it's not fixed within 7 days, I'm going to do it. Now, I think there's a pretty good chance that a judge would turn to you and say, Mr. Robbins, what happened?
And the judge would be right, because there's been plenty of correct notice and efforts on the part of the tenant.
So I think the sword cuts both ways, but I do think it's important. And by the way, you and I are familiar with the Georgia Department of Community Affairs, who has issued this little pamphlet called Tenant Rights in Georgia. They say right in there that repair and deduct is available to tenants in Georgia. Well, so is shoot the landlord, but there will be consequences. And they don't say in there that this is not provided for statutorily in the state of Georgia. And if you are doing this, you are putting yourself in potentially an awkward position. At the very least, I think they should say, before you do this, consult with your attorney.
Well, I agree, John, but 2 points that I bring up often is go to court and see this. You're allowed to go observe and see how a judge deals with it, because the example you just gave is a obvious patent
yes,
basic
example.
Yeah. The tenant is trying to. Unfortunately, in court, sometimes they have a couple of pictures. It happened, today's December 18th, and it happened December 3rd, and they want it done right away. No, that's not acceptable.
Yeah. And I do think it is, we live in a grievance remedial justice system. If you do something that hurts me, then I have a grievance, and I have a right to go before a judge and a jury of, you have a right to a jury of your peers, but I have a right to seek a remedy. And if that remedy is a fixed water heater, then so be it, whatever it is. But that is the basis of our judicial system. And I think landlords and tenants both would do well to understand that. If somebody called you this afternoon and said, Ian, you mentioned going to watch landlord tenant court, how would I do that? What would you say to them? Where would they go, and should they call ahead of time, or what's the scoop?
Thank you, John. You just go to your county website or call the county that your houses are in. Right away, you've hit a home run, because now it's something that applies directly to you. Just talk to the clerk. It's not a specialty question. It's a general question. And just ask, when is landlord tenant court held? And they will give you the times. And then you get there early. You're very respectful. Don't bring your phone in there, whatever. And just sit in the front seat, take notes, and you will get a major education. But it's all about calling the courthouse first and seeing when the court is in session.
Well, and it should be stressed here that no two judges are alike. No two courtrooms are exactly alike. Some of these are typically in magistrate's court. Sometimes they make it to state court, but usually not. And I like to say that you need to know the judge that you appear before may be a part-time judge who is just sort of pretending to sit in to find out if they like being a judge, because they're thinking about running for state court next time around. And if their buddy is the magistrate, they can call their buddy and say, hey, buddy, old pal, do you mind if I pretend to be a judge here? Will you swear me in? Sure. And they get paid a very small sum. And the reality is, Ian, you may very well know more about Georgia landlord tenant law than they do. If they have not practiced in that area before, do all attorneys have some knowledge? Sure they do. But are they all specialized in landlord tenant? No. So this is interesting. Ian, what would you think about trying to find a magistrate who would be willing to come on this program and maybe let you and me batter them with awkward and embarrassing questions?
Well, I think I've actually tried that in some respect for the landlord subgroup at Georgia RIA, but I did have some success in talking to someone who does the negotiations that we call them. Those are typically volunteers. In fact, I found a guy who wrote a book, and the judges in his court in Cobb County actually helped him, review the book for him. He was outstanding. And this is a mediator. That was the word. And
yeah.
He spoke with us and was fabulous, because this is the guy that goes to court. And then when the judge would prefer the mediation before the judge has to make a decision.
Right.
And this is the guy that did it on a volunteer basis.
It's interesting to me because I think if there's one trend, a major trend we can take out of the pandemic, it is going to be in the years ahead. My guess is that landlord-tenant disputes, there will be a tremendous push toward mediation that did not exist 10 years ago. They want you to work it out, and they want it worked out without it getting down to an eviction. I, for one, welcome that. And you and I know, and we're over time now, but the court order where we have an agreement with the tenant that's signed by the judge, and it becomes an order of the court that's recorded, that strategy works exceedingly well. And most judges like the idea of a consent decree or a consent order as opposed to evicting somebody. And it gets it off their desk. It also allows you to preserve the right to collect the money that's owed to you. So, hey, next week, I want to complain about DeKalb County spending only 14% of their rent relief money when the state of California has spent 100%. And what this means is, boys and girls, that soon the Department of the Treasury is going to take from DeKalb County and other jurisdictions what they have been unable to spend and send it to those parts of the country that are doing a better job distributing it, which means if you are a landlord in DeKalb County, you're paying for somebody else to get rent money out of your taxes. Of course, who knows what's happening with our taxes anyway. Ian, I'm going to give you a closing word today before it's time for us to hit the road.
I want to wish everybody a prosperous, great year. Happy holidays. I really, truly believe in the Landlord Survival Guide simply because it made me money. And that's all I can tell you.
Hey, we're in the business to make money. We're not in the business to lose money. And if in the meantime, we can provide clean, decent, affordable housing so somebody will have a place to live, then I feel like we've done our job. All right, folks, Ian, have a wonderful holiday and a super prosperous new year. We get next Saturday off. We're going to have a best of rebroadcast. So you and I can just completely relax. We will not talk to you again, folks. So have a wonderful, wonderful, warm holiday, great food, happy Kwanzaa, Merry Christmas, whatever your particular flavor is. We celebrate it here on Real Estate Coffee Break. So that's the 3.0 Mark IV. Hopefully this is going to go. There it is. That's the 3.0 Mark IV. The John Adams Radio Show. And on behalf of my evil twin, Ian Robbins, this is John Adams reminding you. Your financial future is not a matter of chance. It's a matter of choice. Make your choice a good one. So long, everybody.